Hello, welcome to Steel City Business, the Sheffield business podcast. I'm James Marriott. I'll be your host as we explore the vibrant business scene of the glorious city of Sheffield. Now, in each episode, we meet someone from across the Steel City to learn more about them and, of course, their business. I run my own business. It's called Sound Media, and it's all about helping brands to amplify their voice through audio marketing. If you want to find out more, then head to the show notes. There's more information there. And this podcast is supported by the lovely people at The Curious, creative agency in the centre of Sheffield. Now, if you'd like to get in touch with us, maybe to suggest a guest or for any reason, then there are contact details in the show notes, or head to steelcity.business. Right, that's enough of that. Let's meet our guest.
Hi, my name's Andy Jeffries. I am the head of projects at Stream 7 in Sheffield.
Andy, thank you for joining us on the podcast. This is a good episode for me because I've got a feeling we're going to have some quite geeky stuff going on when we get into this conversation, and I like stuff like that. Tell us a bit more about Stream 7 and what you do then, if you would do.
So we are an end-to-end streaming broadcast provider for the events industry. That's typically who we provide for, but our scope of work does take us further afield. We've been around for over 10 years now, and I think it's fair to say that 10 years ago, we'd have to explain to people what streaming meant and what streaming was before they'd typically engage with us as a service.
Yeah.
Nowadays, everybody understands streaming, from having a Zoom call with grandma to engaging with your media via Netflix, YouTube, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
So really, streaming is just the broadcast of information, typically in a visual format. That's what we focus on anyway, utilising the web.
Okay, that makes sense. I was quite interested in that at some point we all heard the word streaming for the first time. We'd never heard it before. And you kind of like all these words that weren't really in kind of regular use like 10, 15, 20 years ago. At some point we hear them for the first time. We all heard the word internet for the first time at some point. I thought, that'll be nothing, that won't stick around. Okay, cool. So what I'm always wary of doing on podcast episodes is dwelling too much on talking about the COVID years, because I think everyone's kind of moved on a little bit. But I think this is quite interesting because it did, there's certain industries and certain, kind of parts of the world that changed at a pace as a result of lockdown and stuff like that. And obviously stuff like Zoom and video calls and those slightly more efficient ways of doing things using technology was one of those things that changed and was never really going to go back. What did that do for you guys then? How did that kind of change the world that you operate in?
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on there. I don't think you're ever going to replace the face-to-face meetings and the feeling of actually physically attending an event. However, I think COVID taught us massively that sometimes that's not always going to be either the best option or feasible.
Yeah.
So during that period, our industry was advancing at a pretty standard pace, maybe a somewhat speedy pace. But what COVID did was massively accelerate that hugely, by 5-10 years maybe. The event organisers who we work with that were typically used to dealing with boots on the ground and, booking venues and AV companies and everything else, all of a sudden got everything thrown up in the air, and they had thousands of delegates and speakers and a message to put out, and they wanted to continue, they didn't want to lose their audience. And how do you go about that? So yeah, we saw a huge influx of work. We were very, very fortunate in that respect of where we were positioned. A lot of companies did struggle during COVID, and even a lot of events companies, but because of the nature of what we do, the virtual and the hybrid events really took a leap. We were very fortunate in the fact that we managed to keep going, but not only keep going, we managed to employ and give work to a lot of our colleagues in other sectors of the events industry who would, in live events, who would, were really struggling at that point. It was nice in that respect as well. Some of whom continue to work for us. Globally, we all know COVID was a torrid time, but I do think we made the most of it, and we assisted a lot of our clients in kind of into transitioning from physical events to temporarily to virtual events. And now we're in the world of hybrid events post-COVID. I think one of the interesting things that's come out of that is that it feels in our industry there's always a different buzzword, key kind of consideration. So it was COVID, and now it very much feels like sustainability is the next big thing. And again, it's something that we kind of try and focus on and try and assist the people that we work with in those areas. By going virtual or hybrid, you're reducing the amount of people that are on the road, the amount of people that are travelling, whether that be globally or just nationally.
Yep.
As such, having a net benefit on events' carbon footprints. Yep. I think that's a real consideration at the moment.
It's really efficient for people's time as well, isn't it? When you've not got all that kind of travelling to do. So does it kind of feel like it's settled now, and that the kind of stuff that you're doing is the way that it's going to be, or does it still feel like it's sort of finding its feet in terms of what it looks like in the long term?
That's a good question. Settled, I'd be hesitant to say settled.
Is anything ever settled in the world today? But
the technology is obviously always advancing, and I think that goes with any industry that's similar to ours. However, the techniques and the kind of the layout, the lay of the land, what we see in front of us, I think we've got a pretty good understanding of how many people engage virtually, how many people engage physically, and the type of events, because this audience split does vary over the different industries that we work within. So a good example of that is we do a lot of work in the medical sector. These are pretty busy people. The transmission of information that they require, so for example, like live surgery, that's something that we do. We film surgeries and broadcast those to surgeons across the country, across the globe. You're not going to be able to get hundreds and hundreds of surgeons to all come to one place for a full weekend, but they can dial in during an afternoon or something like that. So I think understanding. So to go back to your original question, I think understanding the lay of the land comes with an understanding of the industries that you're working within, and each one does need its own specific solution.
You mentioned earlier actually about filming surgeries, and it was something I was going to ask about, because I think that had not really, when you talk about live streaming events, I probably think about a business's annual conference, and a fairly big business that have probably got staff in various different places. It's just not really, it doesn't make sense anymore to try and get all those people to all go to, I don't know, Cardiff for the annual conference, which is probably what they did 5 years ago. And now people that are based nearby go to it, but everyone else can just tune in and watch it online. That's probably what I think of, and I'm sure you probably do stuff.
Yeah, that is a big portion of what we do still. Yeah.
What kind of other stuff are you involved in then?
To go back to COVID briefly, going into COVID, I think that my experience was we typically worked with event managers. It was the majority of what we did was, as you've just explained there, it was conferences, exhibitions. But during COVID, companies wanting to do all hands and town halls and as you said, these multinationals that want to get a message out to their different offices, different locations, whether that be nationally or globally. We typically go to the location where the board was, or the CEO was, or whoever it was that was delivering the message. And we'd add an extra level of production in there. They'd effectively feel like they had something a bit more akin to television, rather than feeling like they were just sat on a Zoom call. So we'd add that extra level of production in. And now, since that, we're getting a lot more interest and a lot more work with internal comms teams, because they want to continue doing what they learned to do during COVID. So that's been a real interesting development in what we do. Adding that higher level of production, typically, they're quite important people. We are talking about kind of executives, board members, CEOs, etc. And they don't want to just be sat in front of a Zoom call in the kitchen. They want to be sat in front of a couple of high-quality cameras, a decent presentation. And the other thing that we do as well is we compose those together. So you're not just looking at effectively a single shot of one person. It's dynamically edited throughout the broadcast, so that you are getting something that's a little bit more engaging. So that's one of the things that we've noticed. One of the areas that we've certainly spread into is the internal comms. Obviously, you've still got your events as well. The medical thing for me is probably one of my favourites. I find it really interesting. It's a little bit different. We're not just taking feeds from cameras, we're taking feeds from scopes and from vital readouts and from various other pieces of medical equipment, and then composing them on the screen so that the doctors and the surgeons and the consultants who are watching can see a readout of everything that's happening, including a head cam from the surgeon, a room camera that gives a more broad view of what's going on in the operating theatre. So that's probably, if I had to pick, that's probably my favourite kind of job to work on. But then, aside from that, we do lots of things with charities who are doing road shows. We've done quite a few filmed events down at the Cathedral in Sheffield, and that's a pretty spectacular building to be working inside.
Yeah, I bet.
I enjoy that quite a lot. We've done some installation of the Bishop, the Remembrance Service for the Queen. So yeah, and everything from that to going and filming fashion shows in New York. There's a real variety to what we do.
Because there's quite a contrast, isn't it, between those two things? So I get when I kind of talk to people about podcast projects, I get a little bit annoyed when people talk about, we'll record it on Zoom. And you think, you can do that. That's all right. Yeah, you could do that. But actually, to make an impact with audio now, I think it needs to be a level above. And same with in-person stuff. You could buy a £5 microphone off Amazon. Of course you can. But if you want to make an impact, you just need to go that little bit further. I'd imagine that it's probably quite similar, is it, for you when, you perhaps, maybe when you start working with someone and they've been doing things in quite a basic manner, and you're like, look, you need to step this game up a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, we've talked about the advance of technology, and this was something that was temporarily left behind. So when everybody went virtual, had to go virtual due to the pandemic, a lot of the solutions such as Zooms, Google Meet, Teams weren't really set up for broadcast. They were great for having a chat with your family or for doing the local pub quiz, but typically to add the level of production that we require, it involves more control. We need to be able to modify different aspects of those feeds, incoming feeds. Careful about what I say here, because at the time we were using third-party broadcast remote caller systems. So we'd used systems that allowed us to control incoming audio levels. So I think the best way for me to describe it is if we're in a Zoom call back in the day and there's 4 of us in the Zoom call and I'm a little bit quiet and you're a little bit loud, it's hard because you're effectively getting a single source of incoming audio. It's hard to then control that without doing a lot of work in post-production. So it's always best to try and isolate all those different feeds and have them as individual feeds coming in and then mix them together in our studio where we're working. So effectively, what we do is you've got 3 different sides to it. You've got your incoming feed, you've got your production, which is what we do in the studio, and then you've got your outgoing feed. This is in terms of virtual events, in terms of broadcast. What we saw during COVID was a lot of clients say, well, we only use this, we only use that. The NHS is a great example of this. They are pretty much tied to Microsoft Teams.
Right.
And Teams was not wonderful. I know that there was solutions that our technicians preferred to use. But since then, what we've found is a lot of these providers, Zoom released something called Zoom ISO, Teams released Teams events, and they all realised what people were trying to use their systems for and really upped their game.
Right.
Which has then meant that we can start using these services.
Okay.
So, for example, Teams with the NHS, it was either do it or don't do the event.
Right.
Now, we want to do the event and you just struggle through and you try and do it as best as you can. But every time they improve their version and we can invest in the newest version of Teams, then it allows us to do a little bit more. It gives us a little bit more control. Ultimately, the real work happens in the studio, and it's about, like I say, the composition and the cut and keeping that footage engaging for the audience. In the past, clients used to come to me and they used to say, what should I use? What's the best one? And we'd tell them the best one. We're rapidly getting to a point now where the best solution is the one that their speakers and their audience can use the simplest, effectively.
Absolutely makes sense.
They still have pros and cons to all the different solutions, but they're all getting there, and it's become less of a headache for us in the past few years than it was, 5-6 years ago.
That's totally logical. You did a very good job there of phrasing things very carefully, I thought, when you said Microsoft Teams, there's probably software that we prefer to use, and I was thinking perhaps a hamster going around in a wheel would be preferable to using Microsoft Teams, because I think it's the worst software I've ever used, and I absolutely hate it. You before we sat down to record this, you gave me a little tour of your kind of storage room. I don't know what you'd kind of call it, your sort of tech room, which is very impressive. You've got some amazing kit in there, most of which I have no idea what any of it is and what it does, but it looks brilliant. Lots of cameras and different stuff that does great stuff. So you've obviously got a lot of kit that you can use for different stuff. Has there ever been anything that you've not been able to do? Have you ever had to say no to a job because you just can't do it?
Not really, because we partner with some really great companies, which allows us to kind of cover a lot of bases. Our team come from all areas of the live event kind of industry, and as such have a pretty good understanding of what it takes to put an event together. We do find that clients who work with us, and I always call it can you just, but I mean personally I love it, and that is when a client comes to us and said, you did a really good job filming, broadcasting and this. We want the same for the next event, but we need a screen putting in. Can you just? Yeah, we'll put a screen in, no problem. Oh, we want a projector and a screen. Yeah, we can do that, no problem. Can you just put a couple of speakers in, maybe in some microphone? Yeah, no problem. And it grows, and before you know it, you start becoming a bit more of a all-round AV production company.
Yeah.
Our core offering always has been and always will be streaming and broadcasting. However, we do a lot of surrounding, peripheral AV to support an event. Now, there is a level to which, stadiums probably out. But we work with some amazing companies where if someone came to us and wanted a level on that, an event on that level, it's not a problem. And we have done some, seriously large events. But yeah, to do that, we'll bring in one of our partners that provides huge LED walls, or one of our partners who provides massive speaker systems, and we can project manage the entire thing. So the ability to scale up, and that's one of the nice things about being a kind of a small tight team. We employ 8 people, but have a bank of freelancers that's well into 3 figures.
Wow!
And we use them regularly.
Yeah,
they're all over the country, but they're the freelancers. We couldn't do what we do without the pool of freelancers that we use. So. Yeah, I tend to not like saying no to much, but you've got to be realistic. I think one of the things that we pride ourselves in is being a specialist, and I think that's kind of what I'm trying to say. We know what we're good at, and we know when it's time to say we need to bring in support. Saying no, that doesn't come too easy to me, though.
You say yes and you figure out plan afterwards, don't you? If I 5 minutes time I walk out that door, the phone rings. It's Taylor Swift saying, "Could you guys look after my my next tour, Wembley Stadium, Berlin, kind of around the world?" Would you say yes to it?
I reckon I would, because I think we've got some fantastic contacts in the industry. But I'd say yes, and then I think I'd be on the phone for the next several months.
Sorting it out. If that does happen, by the way, if you need anyone to get any input in terms of the audio side of it, you know where I am. One of the things that I was going to mention as part of this episode, which is sort of relevant, but I just find quite interesting, is when I think about the kind of the launch events that Apple traditionally do for their new products. Once upon a time, it would have been Steve Jobs on a stage walking around with a device in his hand and then a big screen behind him, and then they got a little bit better and a little bit better, and obviously during COVID then moved to being kind of a pre-produced piece. and they've stuck with that format, which I find really interesting. That rather than kind of going back to the live event and having all the journalists whooping away in the background, they've kind of stuck with that. So I thought that was an interesting development. What do you think kind of comes next in your industry?
I think that we're certainly seeing a huge uptake on hybrid events. As we said right at the very start, you're never going to be able to replace that physical attending of the event, shaking hands, chatting to people face to face. We're not trying to do that, but we're trying to improve accessibility, we're trying to improve sustainability, we're trying to improve reach. And I think that with all of the technology that we're putting in and utilising, I think, not wanting to sound too cliched, but it's making the world a smaller place. Mm-hmm. As far as I'm concerned, that can only be a good thing. Where we go next, I think that the engagement factor for the virtual audience is still something that often comes as a secondary consideration.
Right.
A lot of the online platforms that we're using are doing really good things around kind of, engagement, such as gamification and networking and areas for, downloadable content, talking to sponsors, private rooms to go and have a chat with people and stuff like that. All the kind of things that you would do when you physically attend an event. And I think that is going to really become a key aspect of all events. We saw the market for online platforms, obviously, during the pandemic was flooded. Everyone was transitioning. Everyone needed a virtual venue. And they all had pros and cons. I think that's really getting dialed in now. I'm seeing a lot of these platforms that are really, really kind of understanding the market and their audience. Whether that's because they were developed and designed by guys who'd maybe never been on an event in certain situations. When you're coding up these kind of things, it's two different worlds, isn't it? Someone who's sat behind the computer actually doing it, and someone who's on the show floor, and bringing these two worlds together. Plenty of them that weren't fit for purpose when they became popular, but now we're seeing they're really dialing it in. So I think that's going to be key moving forward. I think giving that hybrid event its own personality, its own feel, getting it branded correctly, and understanding the audience and understanding, whether you'll be working with consultants or whether you'll be working with a bunch of primary school kids. Each audience needs understanding. Event organisers are the people that understand their audience. So let's ensure that the hybrid audience are treated the same way as the physical attendees.
What sort of impact do you think AI is going to have in the space that you operate in?
Yeah.
Are you seeing it make an impact now? Is it something that people are asking about when you're talking about the setup for kind of their events and things that they're doing?
So there is a couple of areas that we're already utilising AI in. One of the interesting ones is captioning and subtitling and translation, because that's a really laborious job.
Yeah.
It's hard work. The palantypists who do it are incredible. It's really skilled. They train for years and years. They're listening to one thing, typing another thing. They are absolutely superhuman. But that comes at superhuman cost.
Yeah, of course.
I don't like the thought, and I know that a lot of people feel like this, I don't like the thought of people being put out of work by AI. And I'd like to think that that's not going to be the case, because you cannot compete with, at the moment, you cannot compete with what those guys do. Certainly when they've got specialist knowledge of specialist fields, for example, medical, financial, etc. However, for the more basic, lower end stuff, and for the translations that are done in post, so after the events actually happen, for on-demand footage and that kind of thing, the AI is getting pretty good. It still requires. I would never be confident in having an AI translate something for me or caption something and then send it out. We would never do that. No. But we have used programs before that then require one of our team to then go back through. But it certainly speeds up the process. So that's quite an interesting development in AI. I know in the more the business side of things, in business development, this is not something that we do, but I know that people are becoming more confident in using AIs to concisely summarize lengthy documents. I was trying to think recently of like if there was an application for that in what I do. And I'm sure there absolutely is. This is, I'm the first person to hold my hands up and say I'm probably not utilising that technology to its full advantage. But I was thinking about maybe tender documents and stuff like that. I read through quite a few tender documents. And if I could get the AI to summarise that in a couple of paragraphs, then I can quickly establish maybe that's one that we should go for, maybe that's one that we shouldn't go for. So I think there's an application there.
I've got a feeling we could continue this bit of the conversation probably for the next hour.
Yeah, it could be an AI podcast, couldn't it? Yeah.
There is loads of stuff, because I find I recently changed the voice on my Siri on my phone to something that actually sounds much more natural. And when I've got my AirPods in and I'm walking down the street, and I'll have kind of like almost conversations where I'm asking, what's my next such and such, and what's happening, and what's the weather going to be like, and what about this, and ask about like news stories and stuff like that. But then every so often I'll ask something, it'll come back and just go, something went wrong, sorry about that, and I want to throw my phone down the nearest drain. It's so annoying, and I kind of think it's great and it's getting much better, but while ever it's still like messing up every now and then, thankfully we're still in jobs, we're still needed, because we don't mess things up, we're perfect, of course. And on that note, we'll wrap this one up. Really interesting. Love what you do. If there's anyone, particularly people in Sheffield, that are interested in finding out more about your services and whether or not there's a tie-in with what they do, or maybe stuff that they've been thinking about, what's the best way for them to do that? We
love to have a chat. We try and make sure that we're as available as possible for people to ring up. We always say to people we're working with, no silly questions. We've heard them all before. Yep. It doesn't cost anything for a chat. You can ring us on 01143 60 50 60, or you can email hello@stream7, that's the number 7.co.uk. But yeah, get in touch. We'd love to have a chat.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's do this again in 5 years and see how the industry looks, and we'll listen back to us saying, well, AI will never do this, and we'll laugh at ourselves for our silly predictions. It's been brilliant to chat to you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Thanks very much for listening to this episode of Steel City Business. It's been really lovely to have you with us. Now, you know how this works. If you've enjoyed it and you want in on future episodes, then just follow us on your podcast app or on YouTube. The show is very active on LinkedIn. Just search for Steel City Business and come and connect with me as well while you're at it. Big thank you to The Curious for helping make this podcast happen. There's loads more about the show at steelcity.business, and you can get in touch by emailing james@steelcity.business. And hey, if you're in business in Sheffield, then, well, why not put yourself forward as a guest for a future episode? And of course, we're always open for a good chat about how audio marketing could work for your brand. Until next time, thanks for listening.